Thank you, Kevin. I love you. I'm Allison. I'm an alcoholic, and it's really an honor to be here today. Um, I think the first time I heard someone say that in a meeting, I was like, "How can it be an honor to be an Alcoholics Anonymous?" But absolutely, today it's true. Um, Grateful to be here because this program saved my life, and I dearly love the fellowship too. Welcome to anyone who's new or struggling. I hope I can say something that might be helpful to the alcoholic who still suffers. And I know that the alcoholic who still suffers might have, some time. Um, and I just hope that I can be helpful to anyone. Um, my sobriety date is October 15th, 2013. And you better believe on October 14th, I had to drink. Had to. There was no question about it. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs with an alcoholic dad, and I was never going to be like him. Dad, when I was a kid, I remember, I could tell, my dad, so funny, so clever, so artistic, so creative. He'd make these amazing paintings, and was really, really funny, except when he was drinking. And when he was drinking, he was not funny at all. Mean, mad, abusive at times. And so I got this idea that, like, why would anyone drink alcohol? Like, it seemed to piss him off, so I couldn't figure out what the payoff was. And then at 21, I fled home. I got, dad's alcoholism had progressed, and home got increasingly not a good place to be. And I actually got in my little Honda CRX and drove across the country and landed in Sacramento. and out here, I discovered alcohol. And oh my God, it did not make me mean. In fact, I got friendlier, and I'm pretty sure funnier. And so I really believed that I had dodged a bullet and that I wasn't going to turn into my dad. I mean, I remember literally thinking, like, oh, this is so good, because in those teen years, I experienced that angsty, and I'm not comfortable in my own skin. I need to change the way I feel. And that's not, necessarily unique to alcoholism. Like, any human being can feel that way. But and I tried all kinds of different substances and behaviors, but alcohol was the first thing that actually felt like it worked. I actually, like, oh my God, I'm, the shoulders drop and I'm feeling a little bit of relief, feeling a little more comfortable around you and a little more comfortable with me. And, and so I decided I'm going to do this as often as I can, and, as often as I can get away with it. My drinking career, every time I would get away with doing something drunk, I would give myself a promotion. Like, I think that I can do that again. Like, I'm gonna drink more on the job, and drink more while I'm driving, because I'm just not getting caught. And so, like, anytime I would get away with doing something drunk, I would think, well, I'm never gonna do that sober again, because why would I? And as the years progressed, so did my drinking, and I got to that point where I knew that it was a problem, and I knew I had to rein it in. And I tried, and I couldn't do it. And I stayed in that kind of half-assed trying to moderate my drinking, trying to moderate the circumstances, or the consequences, I should say, for many, many, many years before I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I recognized that I needed help long before I sought help. And finally, there was one day that I got up the liquid courage to go to an AA meeting. And I mean, I had a couple glasses of wine first, and probably a bottle, I couldn't leave the house any other way. And went down to this AA meeting, and everyone was really, really nice. And I remember that the guy who led the meeting, or who told his story, he had one arm. And at the time, I had, a few months earlier, I'd fallen down at work and tore my rotator cuff and suffered whiplash. And I didn't get caught because they didn't drug and alcohol test me. So, my bosses at the time just thought it was their fault that I fell. They didn't have the right safety precautions on these stairs or whatever. So once again, I get away with something. But I'm sitting in this meeting, and this guy who has one arm is talking about how he still feels serene. And yeah, it's a little harder to put his shirt on, but that's okay. And and I just thought, oh my God, how can, my shoulder hurts, and this guy's happy with one arm. It didn't make any sense to me. How can these people be sober and happy at the same time? It just didn't, I couldn't wrap my head around it. And when the meeting was finally over, I say finally, because it was at a very hard time sitting still. And when the meeting was over, a bunch of the women in the room surrounded me, like we do. We swarm the newcomer, they could tell. And they're telling me, keep coming back one day at a time. And they're giving me phone numbers. And one lady gives me this really tight hug, and she looked me dead in the eyes, and she says, please keep coming back. She says, I've been sober for 30 years. This works. And with that, I fled. I was like, I'm not signing up for 30 years of meetings. No, one day at a time. That sounds awful, because I thought that was your solution. One day at a time, just don't drink and sit in a meeting. God. So I knew, based on that experience, that I had tried Alcoholics Anonymous, and that doesn't work. And I spent the next year trying not to drink, sincerely trying not to drink, because by this time I really, really wanted to get sober. And after 20 years of drinking, I assumed that the desire to stay sober would equal staying sober. I finally have this desire to actually be free of this madness. And I tried and tried everything that I could think of, reading different books and doing lots and lots of therapy, and lots of therapy on growing up with that alcoholic father, and the fact that I'd been raped at 13, and around the drinking, talking to the therapist about my drinking. And we would plan every week on how I was going to stay sober the following week. And the therapist is not an alcoholic. And, she wasn't trying to be, she knew that alcoholism was out of her realm. But I just chose her at random because I wanted therapy. And so week after week, we would devise a plan together of how I'm going to make sure I have enough Diet Peach Snapple in my fridge, or I'm going to leave my wallet at home, or I'm going to promise to pick up the phone if I feel like drinking, or make plans to go to the gym after work with a friend, and I'm going to want to be sober for that. And all these plans that seemed reasonable, and I would be like, yeah, that sounds good. And then the next week I'd show up and be like, I don't know why it didn't work. Yeah, I left my wallet at home. Guess what? I went back to get it. Yeah, there was Diet Peach Snapple in the fridge, but guess what? I drank instead. And I didn't understand, and I didn't understand. And I was faced with my own insanity coming out of my mouth. I couldn't understand my own actions. And that therapist said, why don't you try Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm like, I already did. And she's like, okay. and then she said, well, would you check yourself in somewhere? And I got to that point and I said, yes. Because I thought that I would get to go to some fancy place that like you see on TV, where like, and nothing against those places, but like, that's what I wanted. Yeah, if someone could maybe give me massages in between group therapy, like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to check myself in somewhere. I want to go away. I wanted a vacation. And I actually found a place here in California that was $40,000. And at the time, I still don't, but I didn't have that kind of money or insurance. And I called my parents back in the Midwest. And I said, may I please borrow $40,000 so I can go away for 28 days? Because I think I might have a bit of a drinking problem. Those words came out of my mouth. And my parents don't have that kind of money. And I knew that. And they said no. And they said no because they don't have the money, but they also said no because that father of mine, that alcoholic dad, he found the rooms a few years after I fled home. He's been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for 26 years now. I knew that. Even though I fled home, we weren't estranged. I would go back to visit. They'd come out here. We saw each other, about once a year or so. I had evidence right in front of me that Alcoholics Anonymous is free and effective. That information just didn't apply to me. I couldn't connect those dots. And so I knew that there was no hope for me. I can't go away to treatment. I already tried Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't stop drinking no matter how much I try. I don't understand it. And I knew without, I hadn't read the big book yet. I didn't know what it says in the doctor's opinion, but I experienced it. I knew that once I pick up that first drink, there's no reining it in. In fact, towards the end, I wasn't even trying to only have a couple drinks because that sucks. That feeling of having just a couple drinks and then trying to stop. Once I activate that phenomenon of craving, that need for more, if my alcohol is cut off, that is not a pleasant feeling. And so, I knew that I couldn't control it and that every time I drank, I would, face some kinds of consequences. Over the years, I like to tell myself it wasn't true, but I lost jobs. My husband was pretty close to leaving me. I didn't recognize my own face in the mirror for I was so bloated. Felt terrible all the time, depressed. But why would I keep picking up that first one? That's what I don't understand. I'm learning new coping skills in therapy. I don't understand it. And that therapist, God bless her, she found a little place not far from me that's not $40,000. She found a little place that just a little spin dry, 5 days in just to detox. That's it. And I said, sign me up. And it was September that year, 2013, that I went down there and they said they had a bed ready on October 14th. I said, okay, I'll do it. Save it for me. I'll be here. And for the next 6 weeks, knowing I have this date coming up, I drank the way I thought I wanted to drink, kind of like, eating all the pizza the day before, going on a diet kind of mentality. And it was the most miserable 6 weeks of my life. So by the time that date came, I knew 1000% I can't control it and I don't enjoy it. And that morning, as I was getting ready to, I was packing my suitcase, getting ready to drive down to the detox facility, my husband walks in on me and I was drinking right out of a bottle. And you guys know that's not disgusting. It's what we do. It's what we do. It's normal, right? But he's a normie and he just looked at me like, what are you, and he just looked at me and he said, is that going to be your last drink? Thank God, because in that moment, I'm still holding onto the bottle and it suddenly hit me. It finally dropped that, yeah, I'm checking into this detox, but they're going to let me out in 5 days. And I know where the store is. There's literally nothing I can do to stop myself from picking up that next first drink. I'm screwed. I don't know how to have my last drink. Thank God. I suddenly realized what it means to be powerless. I wasn't just powerless after picking up the first drink, I was powerless to stop myself from picking up that next first drink. That terrified me. And we get down to the detox facility, and I'm a bit of a crazy cat lady. Some of you guys know that. And we get down to the detox facility, and there was a cat sitting on the bed. And much like one of my cats is sitting, or she's sleeping on the bed. And, that was unexpected. And it felt like a sign from the universe that I'm supposed to be here now. Not everything is going to be okay. Everything is okay right here, right now, in this moment. It felt like a sign. And it felt like it's possible that there might be a power greater than me. As outrageous as that sounds, there might be. And I literally fell to my knees and started crying. And it turned out that detox facility was right next to an AA meeting, and they made us go right then and there. And so once again, about a year after my first meeting, I find myself in an AA meeting drunk. And everyone in the room was really, really nice. And some of them had like 30 years. And I sat all the way down. I knew I needed you. I knew I needed you. And the people in that room talked about God. And I heard that word with different ears than I ever had in my entire life. I heard it as an experience being offered, not a threat, not something made up. You guys were offering me an experience. And a woman came up to me that day and said, "Would you like me to be your sponsor?" And I'm like, "What's that?" Yes, I don't know. Thank God she did. Thank God she made that approach. She did what the big book says. She made the first approach. I wouldn't have known how to ask. I didn't know I needed a sponsor. And I found out later I was her very first sponsee. She had to walk through some fear to approach the crying girl. I couldn't have seemed very approachable. I was probably babbling about how I just met a cat. I don't even know. And thank God for that, because chugging out of that bottle that morning remains my last drink. Obviously not on my own power. My sobriety date is a gift. It is not an accomplishment. It's grace of a higher power I didn't even know existed until alcoholism brought me to my knees. And checking out of that facility, I was terrified, but we got to work. And I started meeting with this woman and reading this big book together and getting into the steps. And I was guided through the steps slowly. I ended up switching sponsors at one point. It was not a smooth road, but I kept moving my feet, and today when I get to work with others, I do it a little differently than I was guided, because I've seen the results that happen by guiding someone through the steps quickly. And when they start helping others, miraculously, the spirit awakens quickly. And it's a miraculous thing to watch. But in taking the steps myself, I described my first step and second step experience just happened that morning. It's simply the recognition that I'm going to drink again, left to my own devices. I cannot stop myself from picking up that next first drink. Alcoholism centers in the mind, and the real alcoholic is powerless over the first drink, not after. I mean, yes, after too, because of that allergy, but also beforehand. I had this insane urge to pick up the first drink, even though I knew better and wanted better. That's a pretty scary spot to be in, to have this potentially fatal allergy, but not be able to stop yourself from picking up the very substance you're allergic to. And that is what cracked my mind open to the idea we have in step 2. Came to believe that, not go believe in, came to believe that it's possible there's a power greater than me that can restore me to sanity. And I saw that I needed sanity desperately. Oh, and you know what's funny? A couple days before checking into that detox facility, and I didn't know how I was going to pay for like, it wasn't no $40,000, but it still was not a small amount of money, and I really wasn't sure how I was going to pay for it. My plan was to just put it on a credit card and ignore the bill, because that's how I rolled back then. And yet a couple days before checking into that detox, I received an unexpected bonus in my paycheck at work that exactly covered the cost. Exactly. And honestly, if I hadn't been drunk all the time at work, I would have known it was coming, and I would have known the amount, but I was just like, oh my God, what? And yet it still didn't hit me what an amazing God coincidence this is. And so I really think that God was like, okay, I tried sending her money. I guess I'll send her a cat, because if I finally have that first step experience, I'm ready for step 2. But I couldn't recognize God in my life until I became broken enough. And then in step 3, I get to make a decision. And it's just a decision, but it's a big one. I get to see how not only am I suffering from this insane urge to pick up what is going to kill me, but I also have been a little selfish. And I've been playing God. I've been depending upon people instead of God. And what that looks like is I decide other people aren't behaving correctly, and that ruins my day because I need you to behave a certain way. Otherwise, I'm not okay, because I'm depending upon you instead of depending upon my creator. And when I see that, I just have to be willing to stop doing that, stop playing God, and just be willing, just be open to the idea that God is my employer now, not my personal assistant, not my butler, but my employer. He'll provide what I need if I seek him, help others, and so I say this third step prayer. I recognize that self is bondage, that I need to be relieved of that. And then I get into step 4. And in step 4, I find out that all these villains in my life, all the people that I thought were villains, my dad, and the, being raped, and as well as like, big ones that felt very real and justified, and also really tiny, petty ones that like um, were embarrassing. And yet, I have this list of people that I think are villains, and I think that they're the reason that I feel the way I do. But then I find out that they're just human beings, perhaps spiritually sick. Some of them actually weren't even spiritually sick. If I'm resentful, I am the sick man. And I get to see that they're just human beings. They're not villains after all. And if there are no villains, I don't get to be a victim anymore. And some of these resentments that I've been carrying for decades, literally decades, lifted right out of me with this new perspective. Just lifted right out of me. And not only that, I get to see how fear had dominated my life when I didn't even know that. And that, if God is everything, and if God's everything and I can place my reliance upon him, there's literally nothing to fear. And yet I'm human. I'll never be perfectly released from fear. I'll still have those fears crop up, but I can recognize that they're based on self-reliance rather than an actual threat. There's this great quote that there is more to alarm us than to actually harm us. And man, that's how I lived, alarmed by everything, but wasn't truly harmed. I was afraid of things that hadn't even happened. And then I get to say all this stuff out loud in step 5 and realize that it's okay to be me, but I want to change. I really want to change. And I know and I recognize that, I'm starting to feel this power flow through, and I recognize that this power can change me, and that I don't want to be that person that was revealed to me on paper anymore. That's not Alice. That's Alice running on Alice power, and that is exhausting and miserable and harmful to a lot of other people. So I get to say the 7-step prayer and recognize that God should have all of me, like all. I shouldn't hold on to any of this anymore, And then in step 8, I have this list, and in 9, I go out and I make amends. And I made amends to my dad. And I thought that, because for the first time in my life, you showed me what it must have been like for other people in my life. Like I never once looked at, like, well, what kind of daughter have you been? What kind of friend? What kind of employee? What kind of wife? My narrative was always what you did to me and how you ruined it. you know, Even coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was like, I grew up with an alcoholic father. And so many people were like, oh, yeah, me too. And my father passed away. And I'm like, oh, mine's alive and sober. But I just wanted to cling to that victim narrative so badly, And yet the steps took that away from me. And I find that that's a good thing, because if other people are the problem, I have infinite problems. But if my self centeredness is the root of my troubles, there's a solution, because I'm starting to believe in this power, and it's starting to change me, And then I get to live in 10, 11, 12. And that is where understanding started to come in. That's where I started to actually um, get to know this book, experience more God, lean into prayer and guidance, because, I don't know how to handle every situation. I'm continually checking my inner GPS system, God, and I'm getting guidance. I'm getting intuitive thoughts popping into my head that I know aren't of me. I know it's not coming from Alice. It's coming from this power I didn't even think was real. And I find out that it feels really good to be useful. And then sponsoring others doesn't, it's not transactional. It doesn't feel like, oh, I need to help someone today because otherwise I'm going to drink. It's like, I want to help. I've changed from a person who went around harming people without even realizing it to a person who naturally actually wants to help, regardless of the outcome. That is not I would not have come up with that program. This is not at all what I thought it would be. And today my marriage is better than ever. That husband of mine, he's a normie, but the boy can drink. Like, he likes to drink, and he can set it down after a few and drink water. But and at first I was really scared of being around it, but after a while it was like, oh my God, this is your home too, honey. If you want to have alcohol in the home, that's fine. And there's been alcohol in our home for several years, and I haven't touched a drop. And that's not an accomplishment of mine. It's a gift. It's the gift of just being sane, because a sane person doesn't have to talk themselves out of picking up what they're allergic to. It becomes a no-brainer. And I'm not suggesting that anyone else needs to test themselves or be around alcohol. I'm just saying that that kind of freedom is available, and I wouldn't have believed it if I weren't experiencing it firsthand. I'm continually faced with finding out what I don't know, finding out what I'm wrong about, finding out what I'm judging currently. And and when I'm faced with those truths, the world just keeps getting bigger, because there's more to discover. If I know everything, then there's no growth in that. Yeah, Kevin and I met in a Zoom meeting, and man, so sometime around 2016, 2017, I became active in a Facebook group that's for people in recovery, right? And a couple of the guys there, um, who are they're housebound for different reasons. Like one has a chronic illness, the other one is caring for a loved one. They started a meeting on this platform called Zoom, and they would post about it all the time, like join our Zoom meeting every Friday night. And granted, this is back 2016, 2017, around there. And I would always look at the posts and be like, that's weird. I just thought it was weird. And they would talk about how they would get to meet newcomers that way sometimes, and get to help others and get to sponsor people who lived in other areas by meeting on Zoom. And I'm like, all right, that's half measures, obviously, right? Like, no, that doesn't work. And then and then March of 2020 hits, and I'm like, can you guys show me how to Zoom, please? Because I believe my opinion over your experience until I desperately need the experience myself. And then the world gets a little bigger. And I find out that this program is not bound by geography or platform. People used to get sober in the mail. Like, what? This this message can be carried a variety of different ways. And when I first started sponsoring others like this, I was astonished to discover that, we meet like this, we crack open the book, and we're in the same room. I have shared the most intimate details and fallen in love with people that I may not ever meet face to face, and yet we know each other. It doesn't feel like there's any barrier here. I hope I continue to be wrong about a lot of stuff. It keeps getting better. And I keep, so many things got turned around just by taking 4 through 9, just seeing how my perspective had been so skewed and so limited. And this broader view allowed me to be free of anger and free of resentment and willing to face people and make amends when I initially thought that they were the ones who hurt me, and totally flipped the script on me. And yet as time goes on, I keep experiencing more little shifts. A few years ago, went back to visit my parents, and Dad and I went to a meeting together, and it was a meeting he hadn't been to before. He didn't know anybody there, and but immediately started talking to a guy in the room, and they became like besties. Like immediately within minutes, they both discovered that they both served in Germany in the late 60s or something, and they couldn't get enough of each other. 2 80-year-old men, just besties. And so it was cute, and when the meeting was over, again, you couldn't separate them. And my sister is a normie, and so she was supposed to come pick us up. And I texted her and I said, hang back, Dad's making a friend. And as soon as I typed those words, I realized my dad is so much more than failed father, that I still had this image of like, he failed during my childhood, so that's it. That's all he's ever going to be, even though, we have a good relationship. Just typing those words made me realize that he's so much more than that. He's so much more than failed father. It's a weird old timer in AA meetings. He's a good husband to my mom. How dare I characterize, someone by how I think they failed me? And if the world were to do a fourth step, how many people would have Alice in that first column? And what would they write in column 2? I'd probably be surprised. They'd probably have some sort of explanation. Why can't I afford that same grace to other people? And today I get to do that. I get to have a whole new perspective Um, my sobriety is not contingent on how you behave, what happens in my day, loved ones staying alive. You know, there's been grief, there's been conflict, there's been uncertainty, health problems, financial instability, you name it. Sobriety is there because I've been restored to sanity and I just seek God on a daily basis. I had no idea that the solution would have me being a better person than I was before I even started drinking. And all those years of drinking and trying not to drink and knowing dad's, you know, sober and happy and Alcoholics Anonymous, I just assumed that, you know, AA would be like it's sometimes depicted on television, you know, like we get a circle of chairs and there's like one light bulb hanging down and everybody's sad. Everybody's kind of looking down at their shoes and we all just kind of like, okay, keep coming back. And like a grief support group for people who can no longer drink. And like, that's as good as it gets, you know, I really believe that. Thank God I was wrong about that, right? It's a whole new way of living. Abstinence is like the least interesting part of recovery today for me. And I had no idea that that was available. A few years ago, I was at a coffee shop meeting with a sponsee, reading the big book, and I'm not, I don't lower my voice, you know. So a young woman sat right next to us, and she said, "I can hear you. You're talking about alcoholism," and we're like, "Oh yeah, we are." And she goes, "My mom's an alcoholic. Can I ask you a question?" And we're like, "Sure. What's up?" And she goes, "Why?" That was the young woman's question. Why? She she said her mom drinks when she said she wasn't going to drink. She said, "Why does my mom drink?" She said, "She loves me." The young woman was 18 years old, pure as a driven snow. She told us she never took a drink or a drug in her life. Bless her heart. So my sponsee and I got to share our stories with her. We got to tell her how we drank when we didn't want to drink. We drank even though we love our families. No human power could have relieved our alcoholism. The love a mother has for her child. Man, if it were enough, there'd be no moms, probably no dads in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Man, if human power was enough, but it's just not. And so we got to share our stories with this young woman. And we invited her to an open meeting. And she came. It really surprised me because, you know, it was down the street and it was, you know, like she showed up and she sat right next to me. And the whole meeting, she sat like this. And and when it was over, I said, "What did you think?" And she goes, "You guys laugh about stuff that's not funny." I'm like, "Honey, I know we do. We do. We laugh about stuff that's not funny." I got that woman hooked up with a friend of mine who's really active in Al-Anon. And I said, "Wouldn't it be nice if you got to meet other kids who perhaps have alcoholic parents and their little face lit up?" Isn't that identification important? We meet with that common peril, an insane urge to pick up what will eventually kill us, and a common solution, these 12 steps that produce a spiritual awakening beyond my wildest dreams, beyond mere sobriety. We laugh at stuff that's not funny. Why shouldn't we laugh? We've recovered and we've been given the power to help others. I'm so grateful for that today. And I think that is enough out of me. Thank you for the invitation, Kevin. I love you guys. Thanks for letting me share.